Drop.
What's up, everybody?
Hey,
Sorry, I was
everybody.
making a TikTok.
Oh, I forgot to do. I'll do that. Yeah, I just want to. Sorry, there's weed eating going on right outside my window. So if y'all hear it, I have to apologize.
I don't hear nothing. Okay, so welcome to another episode of Recap with Mac for the week of June 13th. Welcome to the show, Mr. Mac Haddo. What we got going on?
Thank you. This was an exciting week in the Kratom community. A very significant event occurred when the National Institutes on Health made their announcement that they were cleared to do a human study on Kratom's potential value as an opioid overdose treatment. And opioid use disorder, of course, is a significant problem in this country, remains so. Despite some of the best efforts, and there's been a lot in order to fight that crisis. So the fact that they are using a purified kratom alkaloid, metrogenine, in order to do this study is significant for two reasons. One is that there's always the concern that if there is a new drug application filed that with a kratom compound, that it would trigger what's called the race to market provision of the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act, which says that if there is a NDA, you cannot have a dietary or botanical supplement marketed to people. A couple of conditions on that. One is that we would have to demonstrate that these products were on the market prior to the introduction of an NDA, and we can obviously show that. Secondly, and this is the important thing, is that the substance or compound being studied has to match identically what the product on the market that would be knocked out. And this is a purified metrogenine compound that's being tested that has nothing to do with any product that's currently on the market. So it really will be interesting to see how this plays out. This is an investigational new drug application. It is not a study that has an endpoint for therapeutic values. That will be determined by if they clear the hurdle with showing efficacy, that they would move to a new drug application, which would take probably 5 to 10 years and maybe a couple $1 billion. And the government would need to have a private sector partner. That's the pharma groups. And this is traditionally how government-sponsored research follows that pathway. So that's the way that this process will play out. It sticks it in the eye of these kratom critics who have been saying, oh, kratom is killing people. There's overdoses all over the place, that there are people that are heavily addicted to it. And the reason I say that is that in order for a human study to be cleared by any entity, public or private, it has to go through an independent institutional review board. And the purpose of that evaluation is very clear and direct. You will have to determine that the test that you're about, or the study you're about to conduct, will not put the human subjects at unreasonable risk for their safety. So if it were true, and it's not, if it were true that all of these critics that are saying, oh, kratom killed people, this study simply wouldn't been cleared by an independent institutional review board. And they can whine and cry all they want. What it exposes is the truth. And the truth is simple. That kratom alone does not cause deaths. And if it did, they would not have cleared this institutional review board, certainly if there were a significant number of deaths as they suggest. the fact that a plant compound is plant-based doesn't mean it's safe. We all know that. Any psychoactive plant material has risks associated with it. And that's the balance that the Institutional Review Board has to come to, is what are those risks? And they've determined that even at a highly purified state, that metrogeny does not pose a significant threat to the human subjects. Where does that leave these naysayers out there in the community where they say, their kid or their family member died of kratom alone? And I'm somewhat sympathetic to the argument in that every death is tragic, but the truth matters. And the reliance, for the most part, there are some exceptions because they need to be addressed as well, but the reliance for the most part is these families are relying upon a conclusion by a medical examiner or coroner who puts on the autopsy report that the death was caused by either metrogenine alone, or it was caused with a combination of metrogenine and other substances that were consumed. All of those deaths, every single one of them, is evaluated by the FAERS database by the FDA. That's the Adverse Event Reporting System. Every adverse event and deaths are submitted by medical professionals, and they're evaluated by the FDA. If the FDA determines there's a cluster of deaths that are associated with, let's say, metrogenine and this prescription drug, or a combination of prescription drugs, and they constantly study this, then the FDA will take action. They'll say to the prescription drug manufacturer a black box warning that says, do not prescribe this medication to a consumer who is using kratom. They haven't found that. And because they haven't found it, they haven't issued any black box warnings yet. I'm not suggesting that they won't. It's possible that they will. There are important scientific analyses that are done that talk about the way that our liver, for example, processes all drugs. And that's where the FDA research focuses in looking at adverse events. So we can have that healthy discussion. Unfortunately, the anti-kratom people want no parts of having that discussion. They refuse consistently to have any public forum where they get to say their piece. And here's where the problem is. They don't want us to say our piece. Mm-hmm. They have a single channel communication that says, woe is me. Look at the problem that was caused by kratom. And kratom killed my kid. And you doubt it? Look at what the medical examiner said. Look what the coroner said, as though that is the gospel truth. And we know from multiple examples of where we've proven that the medical examiner and coroner got it wrong. Absolutely got it wrong. Now, people say to me occasionally, how can you say that, Mac Haddo? You're just there because you're defending the kratom industry. So you're a biased source. You're just there because you're defending these people that want to use kratom. So you're obviously biased. You don't have to listen to me. You can go to the Centers for Disease Control report that was the first one that was issued, called the MMWR, where they take reports from coroners and medical examiners, and they evaluated kratom-related deaths. 151 reduced down to 92, where the medical examiner and coroner identified, that's all they did, kratom being present in a tox screen. And they said it's an area of concern. But they said there were 7 deaths that were kratom only. So what that meant was that the medical examiner and coroner said kratom's the only substance that we found, right? Now, there's some limitations to that statement. The first is some of these coroners and medical examiners have no idea what they're talking about because they're not medical people. They're elected. So you could discard that category, but they should have professional people that are working for them or with them in their laboratories. So the test is it kratom only? The CDC report specifically referenced a report from medical examiners and coroners that said that kratom was the cause of death as the only substance present. And it was a Colorado-based group of researchers who published in the New England Journal of Medicine, where they concluded that where there were blood samples available for those deaths that were categorized as kratom only, when they exposed them to more sophisticated testing methodologies, that typically the equipment wouldn't be in the offices of these coroners because it's more expensive. All of the blood samples for which they were kratom only deaths when tested properly, showed polysubstance abuse. Now, what in the world are these people talking about? Now, I get it that you want to believe it. You absolutely want to believe it. And I know that there's a factor of this cohort of families who will say, I will believe anything my family member says. I was speaking to an addict 2 weeks ago, and he said to me, I lied to everybody. I
Yep.
lied to friends. I lied to my wife. I lied to my parents. I lied to my coworkers at work. He said, I was an addict.
I lied to myself.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he said, I didn't want the stigma. And he said, now I've found my way out of it and I can look back on my behaviors. But at the time, that's all I did. So there's the test. And that's why I'm at the point where enough of this hiding behind the shield of medical examiners and coroners. Let's have an honest discussion. And every single one of these families that says Kratom either killed my kid or put my kid into a rehab program now has to do something that I learned when I flew over Missouri and actually landed and had some meetings there. Show me. That's the show me state.
Show me state, yeah.
And enough. And if you think I'm going to believe it just because you say it, show me. And here's a prime example. We've got Dean Francis, who is now become one of the leading critics of Kratom, and he's created this group called End Kratom Addiction. All of this is based on his son Cameron's experience with Kratom. According to Dean, Cameron had a problem with alcohol, which clearly he did. And by the way,
DUI.
he had DUIs. He had multiple interactions with the police that were related to this alcoholism. And he said he used Kratom to help. And Kratom does help people with alcohol. That's a large cohort of the Kratom consumer population. And if you want to look at adverse event data, let's look at alcohol. Mm-hmm. And so Kratom's helping there. That's another avenue of research. But according to Cameron, Dean's son, he then found natural leaf Kratom. And that it helped him for a while. But then he became this terrible addict. And now the voice for this is Dean Francis, speaking for his son, telling members of the Virginia legislature, specifically Representative Cole, saying this natural leaf Kratom stuff, not the 7-OH, not the extracts, it was natural Kratom leaf that put my son in a rehab facility. That's what he told Representative Cole. He then went to the governor, and sitting with the governor in a ceremonial signing of the bill that put in restrictions on the labeling for Kratom products, which, by the way, was not what Dean Francis wanted. He wanted a ban, but he celebrates this watered down bill about labeling as though it is the coup de grace. And there he is in a meeting with the governor and with his son Cameron and with Representative Cole. Now, I would love to hear the conversation when they have to go back to the governor and say, well, we kind of misled you when we told you it's natural leaf Kratom. That was the only thing that Cameron was using when he had all these problems.
It wasn't.
Yeah, well, I agree, but you know what? He now needs to show me, because he refuses to do so. Dean wants to spout off behind a keyboard. He's a keyboard warrior.
Yeah, he is.
To shoot his mouth through a keyboard off in social media posts. I invited him to come and have this discussion. He doesn't want to do it. He spends his time demonizing us. Cameron, to his credit, acknowledged my request and agreed to it. But he's gone silent since then. Now, he's a 30-year-old adult. What in the world is going on here that he's not willing to have a discussion, which he said he would have, with me in an open forum? He could set the ground rules. I invited him to actually pick the moderator. Mm-hmm. And let's just have an honest discussion. Let's find out exactly what you were doing, what your behaviors were, what are the substances we're using, and prove it. Show me.
Well, from what I've read, he started off with the powder, then graduated to the extracts, and then went to a smoke shop to go get his vape juice or something like that and started doing 7-OH. That's what I read.
Well, and here's the rub. You've got Dean Francis, where if what you just said were true, undermines his argument, because he's about banning Kratom. He's not about banning, vapes, or he's not about banning other substances. He just wants to ban kratom. And in fact, he criticizes the American Kratom Association and me personally when I talk about that this is 7-OH. And he says, oh, no. My son got involved with 7-OH prior to the introduction in the marketplace my son got involved with kratom before the introduction of 7-OH. Okay, here's a couple of things we've learned. First is, while I believed, and the evidence suggested that the advent of 7-OH products was in mid-2025, that's wrong.
23.
I'm sorry, 23. Thank you. I'll restate that. The evidence that I thought was there was that you had these 7-OH products that were introduced into the marketplace in mid-2023. Now we know that it was in 2021. So all of this baseline gets wiped out because and by the way, I understand that you think it's natural leaf kratom because that's the way they marketed it.
Yeah.
They took these highly concentrated 7-OH chemically manipulated opioids, which is what they are. They masqueraded as kratom. They deceived consumers. Maybe they deceived Cameron Francis. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they deceived some of these other people that are trotting out their death reports as saying this is the gospel truth. So this is a fascinating area that deserves one thing, a big spotlight. It needs to have all of the evidence on the table. And if they want to call the American Kratom Association liars, if they want to say that we don't know what we're talking about, show me. That's simple. And then I think we can get to the bottom of these issues. What I do know is that for centuries, kratom has been used in Southeast Asia without any of these adverse event reports. What I do know is that when kratom was brought to the United States in the early 1970s, it perked along fine until we got into these amateur chemists in the mid-90s where they started to tinker with it and they started to mix it up with other substances. And that got the attention of the DEA. And I do know that when there were 9 deaths reported in 2009 in Sweden that were attributable to a kratom product called Krypton, and of course the FDA actually used those 9 deaths as part of their evidence and data to submit to the DEA in 2016 that was the basis for the ban. But what the FDA never told anyone to this day, unfortunately, is that those 9 deaths were examined by Swedish researchers who looked at them, tested the blood, and what they came back with was that it was an adulterated kratom product that was laced with O-desmethyltramadol, a potent tramadol basis for the chemical, the opioid. So if you want to rely on good science, if you want people to understand the truth, if you want to make your argument, whatever it is, and I don't care who it is, if you want to trot it out there, and if we find that we're wrong, then we can figure that out and we can put limits, because we've advocated, one, for limits on 7-OH, and we started on 2019. We've argued for and put regulations in place to limit highly concentrated kratom extracts. If you don't use FDA food grade solvents, you shouldn't be on the market. I have advocated personally, and we've tried hard to make sure that all of the vendors that are not doing the appropriate testing of their products prior to finishing products production, and if they're not complying with FDA good manufacturing practices, they should be out of business. So the bottom line is, we're for good regulation. Show me, prove it. If you want to make a claim that is, however impassioned you are, about the results of the family member using kratom that resulted in an adverse event, then you need to tell the world, because there's an institutional review board that looked at all the science and said, you're wrong. There's an FDA staff of scientists looking at every adverse event report, and they say you're wrong. And you've got the evidence sitting out there in front of you that kratom is being used beneficially by lots of people, including those with kratom opioid use disorder. I don't know, is the single experience or even a couple of experiences a justification for the anti-kratom tirade? And that includes Dean Francis, who has a son who ended up in rehab, and it includes the array of the kratom danger awareness people who believe, I don't discount the fact they believe it, that because a medical examiner said it, or because an autopsy report says it plainly, the metrogeny was involved, doesn't mean that that's accurate. So now we all have to sit back and re-examine this, and let's find the truth. I don't think many are involved in finding the truth. They're just about this crusade that they're on.
Litigation.
Yeah, and litigation. There's no question. They're looking for the payday. And by the way, I get it for the parents. They get a shyster trial attorney that comes swooping in, and they got hustled. Say, if your son or daughter took kratom or your spouse took kratom, sign up with me because I can deliver a big payday for you. Well, that hasn't worked out too well. There aren't many cases that result in these big paydays, and there's one reason for it. They have to prove it in a court of law, and that's difficult because the truth isn't on their side. And it's all a convoluted mess when you get reports of kratom use as opposed to actual evidence that kratom was the cause of or a major contributing factor in the death. So I think many of these families have been misled by these trial attorneys, and they don't care. I mean, this is just they go out and get investors to fund their lawsuits, and they get out there and they're making the money. And whether they get to the end point where the huge lottery ticket kind of payday, they hope for that, but they're making money along the way just with their investors. And it's the investors who lose, but more importantly, it's the families who lose because they've been misled. They've been told.
And the people lose because the bans go through. They're going through off of freaking alligator tears.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think the stunning part of this is that you see legislation get through that shouldn't get through because someone goes to their legislator and tells their story, and the legislator says, oh my God, I'm going to help you. And those legislators are looking for, the camera, they're looking for attention. They're looking in some cases to say, oh, this is a terrible situation, so let's get rid of this bad substance. And when you sit and listen to the Matthew Davenport case, and you listen to that legislator who sat up and said, even though she had plenty of evidence to counter what was being said, she did not care. Now, I fault a legislator like that, someone that won't listen, that won't be reasonable. Even the parent initially in that case was halfway reasonable until they got swept up into this crusade. Unfortunate. But the poster child of misinformation by a public official is none other than Utah Senator Mike McKell. That's a man who knows better. He got into the kratom fight. Originally, he posted it on social media because he had a client who was injured by kratom, he claimed, in his district. So he was going to fight for that client through the court system, and he was going to go to the legislature and fix it, and he's going to ban kratom. That was his personal crusade. Now, that lawsuit hasn't developed. We hear it's because the case didn't have merit in order to get through. And Mike McKell, this impassioned crusader, didn't want to pay the money to go through a court case that wasn't going to be successful.
Wow.
That is right, by the way. But then he goes to the legislature, and his conduct is beyond reprehensible for a public official. I served in the legislature. I know that there are going to be occasions where you have things that are important to you, but you don't have the right to shut the door on the other side.
Where your ego swells.
He literally said to the American Kratom Association, there's nothing you can tell me, nothing that will change my mind. He said it. We thought, and with good reason, by the way, that he was upset with former state Senator Kurt Bramble over a battle that they had not related to kratom, where McKell was upset that Senator Bramble had defeated a bill that he thought was important. And so he has said publicly he hates Kurt Bramble. That's not a reason to go after a bill that Kurt Bramble passed in the legislature. And then on the floor of the Senate in Utah, he actually said that Kurt Bramble had gone to the Rhode Island state legislature in the form of Representative Brian Patrick Kennedy, who was a friend of Kurt Bramble's through the National Conference of State Legislature leadership meetings, and that over the strong objections of all of the executive branch agencies, Brian Patrick Kennedy rammed through a change in kratom law, which would reverse the ban and put in the KCPA. Now, that's what he said. He said it on the floor of the Utah Senate. And Brian Patrick Kennedy sent a letter to the Senate president, which unfortunately didn't get into his hands during the session, where he contradicted that. But the more important factor is that if if Mike McKell were interested in the truth, and he is not, I'll tell you right now, as of today, he is not. He wasn't yesterday, he was not, and he wasn't any time during this battle. He would have learned that the governor of Rhode Island vetoed the Kratom bill that reversed the ban in the first year that it was done.
Yeah.
9 months of intense negotiations with the governor's staff and with every executive branch agency in the state of Rhode Island. And we came to an arrangement deal that was accepted by them, not opposed by them, accepted by them. And that's why you have today a reversal in the ban on the Kratom, and you have the Kratom Consumer Protection Act. Mike McKell has a duty to tell the truth. And what he said on the floor of the Utah Senate was anything but the truth. It was a lie. And when the letter came in from Brian Patrick Kennedy explaining it, Mike McKell got a copy of it. Did he stand up on the floor of the Utah Senate and say, you know what, I may have misstated this. I may have made a mistake? Of course not, because it didn't fit his narrative.
You know what? I respect people a lot more when they admit that they made a mistake.
We all make mistakes, and you're more of a human, more of a man to admit to it.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. So after the announcement by NIH, there was a interesting post that was made by Dean Francis, where he was highlighting the fact that, I believe this is the case. We wait to see till Monday, but he put up a post, and so it's a video that I've sent to you that will be up on the End Kratom Misinformation site today and on our YouTube channel, which addresses these issues. And it's a special episode of our series on End Kratom Misinformation, and it kind of highlights this problem, because he being Dean Francis, was taking, I believe, the announcement of a commentary that was authored by a gentleman by the name of Andrew Kolodny. And Andrew Kolodny has become suddenly this great champion for the anti-Kratom people. He did this to the people that were on pain medications and started a crusade against opioid use, and which led to his being the great spokesperson for the Suboxone industry, which led to his publishing articles, which led to him testifying in courtrooms all about how terrible opioids were, and then becoming a consultant to local governments to cash in on the settlement monies that were available to local communities. Think about that. Andrew Kolodny, did all of that, every bit of it, and now all of a sudden he's shown an interest in Kratom. He showed up at the International Conference on Kratom at the University of Florida in February. First time I'd seen him in the Kratom space. And then he shows up at our congressional briefing. And just to give you one example, just one, of the conduct that he engages in, he gets up and talks to Dr. Rahul Gupta, the former director of the Office of National Drug Control Policy, and they're having a conversation, and I'm just a fly on the wall listening. And he's arguing with Dr. Gupta, saying that Kratom is an opioid. And so I stepped in and I said, Andrew, there's no way you can justify that. There's no science that says that. And he looks at me and he says, Mac, he said, I could line up 100 experts, 100, and every single one of them would say that Kratom is an opioid. And he said, don't you know that former FDA Commissioner, Scott Gottlieb, called it an opioid? I said, yeah, I do know that. I said, hang on one second. And I asked Jack Henningfield, who was about 10 feet away, he was in another conversation. I said, Jack, pardon the interruption, I would like you to answer this question Andrew has. Is Kratom an opioid? Now, I don't know who the 100 experts are, but here the preeminent scientist in this area of researching Kratom would be one of those 100 experts, right? Of the top researchers in the world. You would think. And Jack Henningfield said, no, it's not. It's not legally. It's not by plant biology, and it's not by chemistry. It is not an opioid. And Kolodny goes, well, he hangs his head and he starts yammering. He was
backpack
wrong.
on.
He is wrong. And this is fascinating to see him thrash around,
Yeah.
and he can't handle a discussion about the truth.
Every time I would look over to you guys, I'm telling you, it was such an intense conversation. I didn't want to go be nosy and go stand over by there or nothing like that. But every time I looked over in Florida and in DC, it was like intense.
Well, the thing that I think is true is that he's on this perch of an ivory tower, and he's not used to people challenging him.
Yeah.
Because it falls apart when you challenge him. He doesn't know what to say. And it's all about just repeating these little talking points and not engaging in a real in-depth conversation. And I don't think he's used to dealing with someone that understands the issue better than the average person that you would stop on the street. He relies upon people not knowing. He relies upon this perch that he is this renowned expert. Now, I'll tell you one thing, and maybe I mentioned this last week. He did ask me to not say again that he had been censored by 2 publications for articles that he had submitted as research articles, peer-reviewed and published. He said, I did not get censored. He said, I did fail to disclose potential conflicts on the required information that they provide. He said, and it came to my attention I should do it, so I did. I said, I'm not sure I understand the difference. Whether you were censored or whether you were told you better do it or you will be censored, that's like in a courtroom, the judge says, well, you better do this or you're going to end up in jail. How did that happen? So I am officially saying, so that he feels better, that he did not get officially censored by the publications, but he was required by someone, even if it's just his basic ethics, that he had to correct what he had originally submitted to add the fact that he was a paid expert witness on the on the stand for numerous opioid death cases, product liability cases. Now, what he has not done is disclose that he's also been subject to numerous Daubert motions, which is a motion by the defendants saying that expert doesn't have the ability to talk about these issues in this courtroom because they're outside of his expertise. That's happened numerous times because he likes to talk outside of his expertise. And if it were possible in a legislative setting, we could have filed a Daubert motion on him in Nassau County.
Suffolk.
Viewed information.
Did he go to Nassau? I didn't watch the Nassau County one, but I watched the Suffolk County one.
It might have been Suffolk County.
Yeah.
One of those two. But he'll say it anywhere.
Yeah.
He's saying it to anybody who'll listen. Kratom is an opioid. And with that declaration comes all of the stigma, all of the negative connotations, all of the responses people make that kratom is an opioid. And he believed.
That's Bev right there, I believe. She says exactly right. We just submitted a letter to the editor for his new opinion piece in Addiction Journal. He didn't disclose all of his relevant COIs. I don't know what COIs are. What are those, Mac?
Well, I don't know what that is.
Bev, what are COIs? But yeah, and that new opinion piece that he just put out, and then listen what he says in here also. In 2018, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration concluded that the principal compounds in kratom products, metragenine and 7-hydroxymetragenine, are opioids.
Conflict of interest.
Oh,
now, thank you, Bev. Think about this. He sits there and says to me with a straight face, and then he repeats it in his addiction article, that Scott Gottlieb said that kratom was an opioid. Okay. Now, at the time, Scott Gottlieb was heavily criticized for saying that. He relied upon what's called a phase model, which the experts castigated as being an inappropriate methodology in order to arrive at the conclusion that he arrived at. But more importantly, this was the predicate for the FDA submitting their second request for natural leaf kratom products to be deemed to be a Schedule I substance. So the FDA had done it once in 2016. They were back at the trough in 2018. Thank goodness they've now changed their position. But at the time, they had these crusader believers in the career staff at the FDA, led by Doug Throckmorton, who was the chief policy advisor on kratom to Scott Gottlieb, all of whom believed that kratom was an opioid, right? And so it is subjected to an independent analysis by Dr. Brett Giroir. Dr. Brett Giroir was at the time the Assistant Secretary for Health and the designated official under the Controlled Substances Act by the HHS Secretary to be the person who evaluates all recommendations for all substances to be classified as Schedule I substances. So Dr. Brett Giroir reviewed all of the information and evidence and data provided by the FDA to the DEA and said, this is why you should do it. And Scott Gottlieb was not only the author, but the official that was affirming to the DEA that kratom was in fact an opioid. And so Dr. Brett Giroir, who by his own admission didn't know what kratom was when he first started it, was not necessarily a fan of or an advocate for kratom, didn't know, but what he did know was science. And when he reviewed the scientific package that was provided by the FDA, his conclusion was that it needed to be withdrawn. So much so that the Assistant Secretary for Health drove out to Reagan National Airport and caught the acting administrator of the DEA the night before that he was boarding a plane out there. His name was Udom Dillon. He was boarding a plane to leave town, and the next morning they were going to publish in the Federal Register that kratom was going to be scheduled. None of us knew that. It was all secret, but they were trying to slide it through. The slimy way that Scott Gottlieb and the FDA did that defies all kinds of rules that they're supposed to publicly disclose this, but they didn't. And so here is Dr. Brett Giroir, who goes to Reagan National, pulls Udom Dillon out of line, hands him his rejection letter. And in the letter, he outlines specifically, I think it's like a 5 or 6 page letter. It's public now. He outlines all the reasons why the FDA is wrong. And Scott Gottlieb, based on information, I wasn't in the room, but others who were, came raging into Giroir's office the next morning, upset that his prized project had suddenly been undermined, and they got into a tense discussion and argument about it. And Gottlieb was unable to persuade Dr. Giroir, who looked at it objectively. And so when this letter finally was disclosed, and here's something that's really important. At the time that this decision was made, on August the 16th of 2018, when the withdrawal letter was submitted, it should have been public information that happened. We had a FOIA in, and the FOIA, and it was related to anything that was going on with respect to kratom. And the FOIA rejection consistently was that there is an ongoing regulatory review. And what happened, and I learned this a year and a half later, in 2020, as the new administration was coming into power, the individual that worked for Dr. Giroir called and invited me to go to dinner. And I said, okay. And we went to dinner. He said, look, I wasn't able to tell you what really happened when we were having these discussions. And I know you and Dr. Henningfield came in. You made an amazing presentation. That was Jack, not me. Jack presentation. He said, we were all persuaded. We thought that, from a staff level, that there was no basis for the FDA to move forward. He said, when the withdrawal was made, it was Scott Gottlieb, this champion of doing the right thing, was the one who imposed the restriction on disclosing that letter to the public. So I said to this individual, I said, well, can you give me a copy of that letter? He said, I can't. I would like to, but I'm leaving. He said, but I can tell you that you will never get it under a FOIA as long as Doug Throckmorton at the FDA is involved, because he's this champion in the FDA commissioner's office. No matter who the commissioner is, you're going to have trouble. He said, but you need to get members of Congress to ask for it, and then they have to cough it up. So that's what happened. We had 2 members of Congress, one from Virginia, one from Wisconsin, who made the request. It was bipartisan, and we got the letter. And then we see that letter is astounding in terms of its rejection of this argument, the scientific argument that Andrew Kolodny is now relying upon. And who does Andrew Kolodny decide is his champion to say that kratom is an opioid? He takes Scott Gottlieb, whose evaluation was independently evaluated by Dr. Giroir and his staff, and they said it was embarrassingly poor evidence and data, and a failure to consider the overall public health.
Is
Now,
Kolodny quoting Gottlieb, or is that Dean Francis?
no, it is Kolodny quoting Gottlieb. It's in his addiction article, in his commentary. And by the way, that's all it is. It's commentary. It is rehashed nonsense, the personal opinion of Andrew Kolodny. That's something he should have put in his conflict of interest statement, is that I don't understand what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Just so everybody knows. I'm relying on Scott Gottlieb, who got trashed by his boss, by Dr. Joie. He said, put that in there. He doesn't do any of that. He claims as evidence that it was FDA Commissioner Scott Gottlieb who told the world that kratom was an opioid. And guess what? FDA Commissioner Scott Gottlieb, who told the world that kratom was an opioid, was wrong. He was simply wrong. And the evidence proves it. And for anyone today in 2026, to claim that Scott Gottlieb had an authoritative and qualified opinion about kratom being an opioid does not know what they are talking about either, because he ignores science. This is the Andrew Kolodny who, by the way, is looking down the road and wants to be an expert witness in these product liability cases, wants to be able to consult on kratom, obviously is getting funded from someone, which he has not disclosed, in his new position at Brandeis University. This isn't out of the goodness of the man's heart. He doesn't have a record of any of that. He has now looking for the next payday. And he's starting, why would he show up at the University of Florida? Why does he show up at a congressional briefing, except he has this financial interest that is obviously underpinning something? Now, the assessment of Dr. Kolodny's interest in the opioid crisis initially was because of the treatment center groups that were advocating for, and the drug manufacturers where these treatments were applied, Suboxone. That's where he was getting allegedly his funding. He certainly got a lot of money being an expert witness from all the trial lawyers that were obviously going against the opioid manufacturers. And now here we are. Here we are, where there ought to be a fair evaluation of the science. And Dr. Andrew Kolodny is hardly the repository, and is certainly not, with his record, someone who can be looked at as being a responsible adult in the room when it comes to reporting things like Scott Gottlieb says that it's an opioid.
He's more like a suppository. Because he's full of shit.
I don't know.
Because the thing of it is that I'm glad that Kolodny went to the University of Florida presentation we went to. I'm glad that he went to DC, because everything that we were learning is what he learned, but he's twisting it, and we can counteract that.
Well, here's an interesting thing. At the University of Florida, he's espousing this view that kratom is an opioid because of the way that you have to detox from it. And he had just walked out of the hour-long presentation by Dr. Nora Volkow, who herself has a laboratory in her office where she researches metrogeny herself personally. And she was describing the body of evidence that was the result of over $100 million in research invested by the National Institute on Drug Abuse. And her conclusion was that the experience of a person who has kratom dependency, how do you get on, as opposed to addiction? She was making the distinction that except in rare cases where people have an addiction personality, they are not going to build up this tolerance to kratom where they can take huge amounts without to have the effects that the anti-kratom people are trying to make. Her point was simple. She said the typical withdrawal from a kratom dependence is much like what you see with caffeine, where you have 10 days of a minor headache, runny nose, upset stomach. And then importantly, you walk away.
Yeah.
You don't have any medical intervention. No, you don't need it. You don't have to have Suboxone. You don't have to have any other of the medications that the FDA has approved for use by treatment centers, and the intense medical supervision that's required for those that have opioid use disorder. So she made the distinction. He walked out after listening to that hour-long presentation, and the filter in his brain, he only heard one thing, kratom. He heard the word kratom, And somewhere in her presentation, he heard the word opioid. And then somewhere else in the presentation, he heard the word withdrawal. And all of a sudden he said opioid, kratom, withdrawals. I mean, I was stunned when I was talking to him. And you saw that intense discussion.
I did.
I couldn't believe how dumb he was being about something he had just heard. And he was trying to articulate it to me as though it were true. And I was challenging him. He's not used to being challenged. He's in an ivory tower mentally, and he just is going to do what he's going to do, right? And he doesn't care about the truth, because if he has on his mind his own narrative, and by the way, any scientist would crave the truth, but he's
Right.
interested. He's got an objective somewhere, and now he's landed at Brandeis University, and Brandeis ought to sort of pony up as to who's funding this whole operation that is now a very intense effort against kratom. They should tell. Is he got them hoodwinked? I don't know. Is he got people that are funding him at Brandeis, that they're taking the money and getting their they get a rake off administrative fee.
Yeah.
They get their money, they're happy, and then they've got Dr. Kolodny, who showed up and said, "Hey, I'm going to be this anti-kratom crusader," and guess what? He steps out with this addiction commentary. He's not required to do much at all with a commentary. I have written a commentary I'm going to submit to Addiction that counters what he's saying, okay? And we'll see if they print it. But it's going to be up on our website on the End Kratom Misinformation so that everyone can read it. I think it needs to be contested. Andrew Kolodny needs to be knocked down from his ivory tower and deal in the real world with the rest of us and look at evidence, look at the facts, look at what is true and what's not true. And here's the great part, and this is part of the video that I did. You have Dean Francis, who announced pompously on Friday that here's the end of the kratom industry, the end of the American Kratom Association. Big news, and I can't wait to share it on Monday. I think he's talking about this commentary. I think on Monday he's going to have a problem coming up with what he promised, right? What is this huge news that's going to disrupt the entire kratom community? It's going to destroy the American Kratom Association. I don't know what he's going to concoct, but let's see, right? Because again, he's another guy not interested in hearing the truth, not interested in the discussion, not interested in having any kind of a reasonable discourse. He just wants to hide behind a keyboard and lob his little invectives over the internet and think that's fine. I don't.
Talk about ivory tower. That dude too, like more like a white picket fence in the suburbs. That's Dean Francis.
He's dug himself a foxhole, which includes a couple of people in his foxhole. He's now invited his son, Cameron, obviously, and I get it. Alcoholism is tough. I grew up in a family with a stepfather who I saw firsthand what alcoholism does to you. I saw his behaviors. I saw his separation from normal thought in society.
Yeah.
I saw him destroy our family. So I get it. I understand that. Alcoholism is terrible. And when you're an alcoholic, you lose control often of, particularly if you're a severe alcoholic, with your behaviors. And I don't know Cameron's situation because he hasn't told me yet. I don't know whether he encountered other substances. I don't know whether it's accurate for him to say that it was only natural kratom leaf. I'd like to see the products he was involved in. I don't know whether his father is telling the truth or whether his father knows the truth about whether Cameron used 7-OH products. I don't know the truth of whether his Cameron was involved in using other non-kratom substances, which could have impacted his behaviors. We just need to know that. Not just me. It's not just for me to know. I think that Representative Cole needs to know.
Mm-hmm.
I think that Governor Spanberger needs to know because Dean Francis put them in the line of fire when he trotted out his message. And if that message is wrong, if it's incomplete, if it isn't what they were told, that Cameron was addicted to natural kratom leaf products, put him into this addiction recovery center. He was out of control until then. Well, let's find out. Let's have a serious examination of all these things. I don't know whether Cameron's in that boat of the person I talked to a couple of weeks ago that he lied to his parents about, and his family and his wife about what the effects of this addiction was in the drugs that he was on. I don't know any of that, but we deserve to know if, and this is the big if, and I think it applies to every one of the anti-kratom people, if you choose to weaponize your anti-kratom message using personal stories, In Cameron's case, my addiction, going into recovery, all of that. If you're going to use the death of a loved one and you weaponize that grief and you go to public hearings and you testify and you say, Kratom killed my kid and here's the evidence. If all of that is happening, then we have every right to examine whether or not that claim is true. And I've got Wendy Chamberlain out of her mind saying, how can Mac Haddo do this? How do they have the audacity to talk about these autopsies of our loved ones in a public meeting? They go and testify all over the country.
And news stories. And they talk to journalists. I mean, if you're putting it all out there.
And podcasters. Like,
yes, yeah.
You already gave out the information. We're just piggybacking off of that with the correct information.
Well, and that's the key. If they're doing all of that, why can't we be out there and talk exactly about how they've misled, whether intentionally or not, how they have misled a podcaster, a legislator, a news reporter. And they're doing it. They're doing it every day. I know for a fact that some of them are directly not telling the truth.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know about all of them, but that's what we should do. Let's have this discussion. Let's have it hosted by Mike McKell. Let's have him host it. I'd love to have that son of a gun sit there and actually talk to us, because he won't do it right now. Let's have Mike McKell, who sat before the interim health committee in the Utah legislature and pompously said, when asked directly by Representative Chevrier about the FDA dose finding study, and he said, you can disregard that because that was funded by industry. Now, set aside the fact that every prescription drug, with very, very few exceptions, that you now benefit from when you go to the doctor and have prescribed for you was funded by industry. Okay, that's just a fact of the matter. But he demonized it and said that study, that FDA dose finding study, was funded by industry. Then, when challenged about that credibility, he pompously holds up his phone at the end of his testimony and said, I just phoned a friend.
Mm-hmm.
And I verified that was funded by industry.
My jaw dropped when I saw that.
Yeah.
It converted what could have been a simple mistake. It could have been. Well, that's what I thought. It converted it from that to a bald-faced lie. And here's the important thing. He never once has corrected that. He's never gone back to his colleagues in the Utah legislature and said, you know what, I made a mistake. Because that's not in him, apparently. And I can tell you that I'm a registered lobbyist in the state of Utah. I have to do that in order to go and testify. If I said to the Utah legislature that the study that you just referenced was funded by industry and you should disregard it, I would be subject to a fine and jail. That's a fact. Lobbyists are not allowed to intentionally mislead legislators. But apparently, legislators can mislead other legislators, and they don't. And that's certainly not fair. So that's part of the discussion. And I think that as we expose this more, the legislators in the state of Utah in the next session are going to have a much better view of what they were told by their colleague. And I don't think there's going to be as much trust level. And I think that's going to be true in some of these other legislatures as we go through.
Especially in Virginia with Dean Francis, because he's gunning for a ban now.
Yeah, well, he was before. This is the thing that it's kind of irritating. I understand what he's doing, but he goes in and he puffs up all of these things that he claims are these great victories. He points to Virginia. When he started out with a ban, got his butt kicked on that because of the facts and the science and advocates, and then he touts his great victory that he got a requirement for labeling on a Kratom product as the grandest victory in the world, trumps up this bill signing with the governor, which is all politics, right? They were looking for social media stuff. Well, that's going to come back and bite the governor and Representative Cole in the end. But he then calls every single thing that happens in the country the Utah bill. Great victory. But yet they were gunning for a full ban, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you hear their discussions about it. So I call them the troubadour troop. You've got Dean Francis, you've got now Andrew Kolodny, you've got the Patty Wheeler, who is a Hollywood connected mother who claims that her son died of kratom. That's what she says. That's what her documentary says. Now she's modified it a little bit, saying that kratom was involved in his death. Okay, that's a little bit of a shift. I'll tell you why. Because frankly, if you look at the autopsy report for her son, what you find is that kratom was detected in the tox screen. It was positive. It was not quantifiable.
Yep.
Not quantifiable, which means that no medical examiner anywhere has a legitimate basis to call that a metrogenine contribution death, other than it's convenient because they've been to a conference and they heard the word kratom and they said, oh, I can add that in there. Was it a significant factor in the death of her son? It appears not from the tox screen because it was not even quantifiable.
Yeah.
But that's another one of the troubadour troops, because she's running around the country, and she in Virginia. There's the video that I just saw yesterday where she's introducing her documentary to the Dean Francis sponsored showing of her video in Virginia, and she said, "Oh, I've made Mac Haddo mad." She hasn't made me mad. I'm not gunning for her like she says. I just want the truth. And it isn't about Mac Haddo. It's about whether the truth is being trotted out. And she's now part of their group. And then, of course, there's Wendy Chamberlain. Wendy Chamberlain, who has said on their social media posts to all the kratom danger awareness people, do not publicly show autopsies and tox screens. Don't do that because they'll misuse them. How? If the coroner and the medical examiner's conclusions about the contribution of metrogenine in a death are scientifically valid, you should be trotting those out there every day. It's not what they want, because they have seen, and what she's referring to, by the way, and I get it, we had a mother who actually, and you all know this story in Ohio, the mother that challenged the medical examiner and said, in coroner in Ohio, two of them, who both concluded that kratom was the cause of death of her son. And it was only through litigation where it was exposed that they had not a shred of evidence to support that. And even the tox screen results that were submitted to NMS Labs, which they relied upon, showed that the level of metrogenine in this young man's bloodstream was 256 nanograms per milliliter. Okay.
That's low.
Yeah.
Lab people said, when asked by our lawyer, we're going to subpoena you. We want to see this information. They said, we want no parts of this case. We, NMS Labs, would not have called this a kratom death because our view is that it doesn't even get to a level of concern for anyone to look at the contribution of kratom, not the cause, the contribution of kratom to a death until it gets to 1,000 nanograms per milliliter. Cause of concern, because we wouldn't have called this a death. And then the lawyer said, okay, got it. Tell me what other substances were in this young man's system. And the NMS Lab said, we don't know. What do you mean you don't know? Well, they only asked us to test for metrogenine. That was it. Now, we then went back to the coroner and said, we want the blood sample to be tested independently to see what other substances were in this young man's bloodstream. Under Ohio law, a coroner is required by law to hold that blood sample for a year. We were in the 9th month. They destroyed it.
Man.
Now, why would we contest a conclusion by a coroner or a medical examiner? Because of that kind of conduct. Why is Wendy Chamberlain not interested in having any of these things made public? Because she knows, or should know, that there's a defect in their rationale for relying upon these reports because they are properly examined. So here's another thing, and I think it's a pretty powerful point, that if it were true, and it's not, but if it were true that you have all of these deaths that, as Senator McKell called it, devastating the state of Utah, with one death after another, piling up in the morgues, they're overcrowded in the morgues, all this nonsense. If it were true, why hasn't there been cases adjudicated by judges after a fair evaluation of the evidence piling up, saying that the kratom is a bad stuff, and why isn't there then a complete withdrawal from the market of kratom products if what they're saying?
Yeah, they act like people are just dropping like flies all over the place.
Yeah, devastating according to Senator McKell, devastating, and all these deaths. And it's not true. It's just simply not true. So, there's this body of evidence that sits out here that is dramatically different than the narrative by the troubadours, the anti-kratom troubadours. And they need this. They need it desperately in order to continue to sell their misinformation. That's why the AK is going to continue, and it may be a years-long project, because we're going to go after every bit of this misinformation that's being peddled by these merchants of anti-kratom nonsense. We're going to be out there fighting for it because of one simple thing. Kratom consumers have the right, under the laws in the United States, to make informed decisions about their health and well-being, as long as the product meets the standard for being on the market with a reasonable basis of safety under conditions of use. Nobody should be getting in the middle of that. Nobody. And just as going back to the court problem, look at what happened in Ohio. You have the Governor DeWine of Ohio, who thankfully is on his way out this year, who instructed the Board of Pharmacy that they should list kratom and 7-OH as controlled substances under Schedule 1. And so what the Board of Pharmacy did, it was a horrible kangaroo court where the chief pharmacist for the Board of Pharmacy made a very complicated, very detailed, albeit convoluted, between 7-OH and kratom through the whole thing. She never made a good distinction of it. And she made that presentation. At the end of the presentation, 45 minutes of very complex scientific information, and not one single question from the 8 members of the Board of Pharmacy. They made the motion, rubber stamped it, and off it went. Now, we sued them because they're wrong. Because in that emergency rule on 7-OH, they included any product that includes any level of 7-OH. And so the judge said, I'm not buying it. So you are restrained. We entered into agreement with them that they would not enforce against natural kratom leaf products. And the judge went on to say, and that includes any form of a natural leaf kratom product, including beverages, which they were trying to restrict at the Board of Pharmacy, and you are permanently enjoined from enforcing that rule against natural kratom leaf products defined by the court. Now we have to sue the Department of Agriculture because they stood up to the court and said, we're not relying on the governor's order. We're relying on the food safety law, which intersects with the federal law. And we have the FDA and kratom webpage, which says that kratom is illegal. All kratom is adulterated. Now, this is going to be a very important court case because what it will test is whether or not there is a basis for reliance on the FDA and kratom webpage. Is it a rule? And here's the kicker for them in Ohio. It's not a rule. It is a guidance document that is poorly written, but it never, and this is the critical point, it never went through the Administrative Procedures Act that all federal government regulations have to go through if they're going to be treated as an official rule. This was something that someone in the career staff, anti-kratom career staff, who obviously went on a bender and decided to write anti-kratom nonsense because they weren't getting their desired ban on kratom. And so they put up this language. And some of the language is horrible in that it does not even account for procedures that a kratom manufacturer can legally go on the market, which includes a new dietary ingredient notification process, which means if I'm a manufacturer, I submit my scientific dossier to the FDA and they have 75 days to review it. They can come back and say, here's our objections. And they do. They always come back with objections. And then the manufacturer has to respond to those objections. And then they are permitted to go on the market. They are at risk at that point. Because if the FDA determines that the product that they have evaluated and the objections that they have raised are legitimate enough, they can go on the market and seize that kratom product. They already have the identity of the product. They know exactly what the product is. They know what the deficiencies that the FDA claims are there. And if they are a significant public health hazard, they can withdraw them from the market. There have been multiple NDINs that have gone through that process and not one single withdrawal from the FDA. Now, you tell me what's going on here. So you have in Ohio now, the Department of Agriculture is going to have to explain to the judge why they're relying upon an FDA and Kratom webpage, which has language that says that all Kratom is adulterated, and that's what they're relying on. And so they said to the judge, well, Your Honor, we want no parts of the Board of Pharmacy thing, but we're doing the right thing. We're relying on this. So the AKA is going to sue the Department of Agriculture this week, and we're going to force them to come into court and explain. When I just got the transcript of the original trial, and the Department of Agriculture witness was on the stand. It was their expert witness. He could not answer many questions at all. When asked by, and the judge piled on, said, I'm not sure I understand. What are you saying? And he goes, well, I don't know. I don't know. I think this is the way it is. And, I mean, it's a joke when you read through it. This guy was justifying the ban on Kratom products being sold with the FDA and Kratom webpage saying that all Kratom products are adulterated, and he could not point to the basis upon which they made that determination, other than to generally say, oh, we talked to the FDA, and they tell us that, it's adulterated. And the judge even said, what? Who did you talk to? What is going on here? So it's going to be a very interesting step, because that webpage is the problem in Michigan, Minnesota, Ohio, New Mexico, multiple states.
Multiple cities and counties.
Cities and counties, they all rely on that. And I think that there's going to be a day of reckoning on that issue. So going to be fun. We're going to be able to see exactly what how the FDA justifies their guidance document being used by, and they know it, being used for jurisdictions. And here's the important thing. Will they have a defense to say, well, we didn't know the states were doing that? You have a guy from Ohio that's saying we regularly talk to our FDA liaison, and this is what they're telling us. And so there'll be other litigation efforts undertaken in other states, because the time's come for everybody to be accountable. And I'm sure that the states are going to call witnesses like Andrew Kolodny, who's going to sit up there and say, well, Dr. Gottlieb says that Kratom's an opioid. I mean, you can project.
And then Dr. Gottlieb works for Pfizer. Does he still work for Pfizer now?
I think I haven't followed it in the last couple of years, but he was on their board.
Yeah.
And he obviously, I wouldn't say that Kratom is the major issue in his life. He doesn't want it to be, because he got hosed with it.
Yeah.
But he certainly has to be accountable. And I'll bet money the last thing Dr. Gottlieb wants is for Andrew Kolodny to be running around saying, well, Dr. Gottlieb said it was an opioid, because Gottlieb knows he got his hat handed to him. So, it'll be interesting to see.
Dr. Gott lies and Dr. Kolod lies. All right, you want me to play that video?
You can, yes.
This is going to be a premiere of Mac Haddow's episode 4 of In Kratom Addiction.
Not episode 4, it's a special episode.
Special. Oh, okay.
Oh, nice.
Is introduction.
I almost said In Kratom Addiction, but no, it's In Kratom Misinformation.
I have it down here,
buddy.
the ticker at the bottom, the website.
There you go.
Okay, so let me pull this up. So I put episode 4 on the thing, on the title, so I'll change that after I'm done. So my bad. Special premiere of a special episode.
Hello, this is Mac Haddo, Senior Fellow on Public Policy with the American Kratom Association, and welcome to this special episode of End Kratom Misinformation. For those who follow some of the anti-Kratom advocacy posts on social media, one that caught my eye was a post made by Dean Francis, who, as many of you know, is the self-appointed head of a new anti-Kratom group, End Kratom Addiction, where he posted his latest hyperbolic prediction to the end of the Kratom industry and the devastation of the consumer advocacy group, the American Kratom Association. Here's Mr. Francis's latest doomsday prediction for Kratom consumers. Quote, super bad news for the Kratom industry today. Can't wait to share it on Monday. It's a really bad time for the American Kratom Association, unquote. And then get this ending. Quote, it's only the beginning of a tidal wave of truth coming, unquote. This isn't the first kind of over-the-top attack on Kratom consumers launched by Mr. Francis. Personally, it reminds me of the ragtag carnival operations that would land in town for a couple of days, and they always had a sideshow barker standing outside of a tent, loudly trying to attract crowds with exaggerated pitches and sensational claims. Step right up. See the world's only man with two noses. Only one dime. Well, like the carnival hucksters, Dean Francis is asking us to step into the shadows of his anti-kratom tent to see the man with two noses. And I think what he's promoting is his new friend Andrew Kolodny and his just published anti-kratom commentary in the Addiction Journal. If that's the sensational doomsday for the kratom community, with Dean Francis barking like a carnival huckster for us to see the man with two noses, the reality is, as it's always been, it's all fake. And Andrew Kolodny's anti-kratom commentary would even make Pinocchio blush for having the longest single nose. This is about Kolodny's latest commentary. It's entitled, Here We Go Again, Kratom and the Failure to Learn from the Opioid Crisis. That commentary reads less like a scientific analysis and more like a familiar attempt to force kratom into a predetermined narrative. The timing for the publication of this commentary could not be worse for Kolodny and Dean Francis. Kolodny, whom some advocates in the pain patient community claims to have the opinion that he is just a mercenary for hire for the Suboxone industry, and he now appears to be looking for a new consulting and expert witness gig, given that opioid litigation is largely drying up. The evidence shows Dr. Kolodny was a highly controversial player in the attack on pain patients' access to needed opioid medications when the self-created crisis was at its peak. What Kolodny and his carnival barker Dean Francis completely ignore while ginning up their latest breathtaking predictions on the demise of the kratom community was that Kolodny's so-called commentary in the Addiction Journal got bigfooted by the announcement made by the National Institutes of Health when they authorized and funded a human clinical trial examining purified kratom alkaloids as a potential tool in treating opioid use disorder. To be fair to Andrew Kolodny, and fairness is not a term that Dean Francis or Kolodny are likely to be familiar with, you have to submit any personal commentary to publications like the Addiction Journal weeks in advance of the publication. Then you have to take the risk that intervening events can leave you looking like that man with two noses, that those that paid the 10 cents then clearly see to be only a huckster scam. For NIH, the decision to embark on this study was not made casually. There have been numerous peer-reviewed published research articles pointing to the growing evidence that opioid addicts are able to use kratom to wean off of dangerously addictive and potentially deadly opioids. Kolodny dismisses such notions out of hand because he is now the self-styled expert on all things kratom, and he has joined forces with Dean Francis, Wendy Chamberlain, who is the founder of the anti-kratom advocacy group Kratom Danger Awareness, and Patty Wheeler, who used her Hollywood connections to produce a documentary about the tragic death of her son, whom she believes died because of kratom. But after more than $100 million of our tax money invested in kratom research by the National Institutes on Drug Abuse, NIH is relying on scientific evidence in announcing the NIH-funded human clinical trial on the potential benefits kratom can offer for opioid addicts, not just the opinions of this loosely formed Kolodny, Francis, Chamberlain, Wheeler troubadour troupe pushing their over-the-top anti-kratom messages. If kratom presents the kind of extraordinary risk Kolodny hypothesizes about with the descriptions of widespread addiction, overdose, and severe public health harms, how did an NIH-funded study receive approval to administer kratom-derived compounds to human subjects suffering from opioid use disorder? The answer is straightforward. The scientific evidence is far more advanced than Kolodny wants to admit. Here is the inconvenient truth that Kolodny, Francis, Chamberlain, and Wheeler do not want to hear. Before human subjects can be enrolled in any study, an independent institutional review board must determine that participants will not be exposed to unreasonable safety risks. That reality creates an obvious problem for Kolodny's central argument. Throughout his commentary, Kolodny relies heavily on former FDA Commissioner Scott Gottlieb's 2018 declaration that kratom is an opioid. What Kolodny fails to mention is the federal government's own scientific leadership team subsequently rejected the effort to schedule kratom. Former Assistant Secretary for Health, Dr. Brett Chawa, reviewed all of the evidence underlying the Gottlieb kratom scheduling recommendation and described it as, quote, embarrassingly poor evidence and data and a failure to consider the overall public health, unquote. The recommendation for kratom scheduling was withdrawn. It was not a private discussion. It played out in real time on a Twitter exchange between Gottlieb and Dr. Chawa. That omission is not a minor oversight by Kolodny. It is central to the understanding of the federal government's evolving position on kratom based on science. Kolodny also ignores the growing body of evidence showing that natural kratom leaf products and highly concentrated, chemically manipulated 7-OH opioids are not the same thing. The FDA's own human dose finding study found that kratom appears to be well tolerated across all tested dose levels with no serious adverse events reported. NIDA has repeatedly acknowledged that deaths involving kratom are rare and frequently involved when they do occur with multiple substances, underlying health conditions, or product adulterations. One of the bit players in the Kolodny, Francis, Chamberlain, Wheeler sideshow on kratom is Utah State Senator Mike McKell, who boldly tried to discredit the FDA dose finding study on kratom by telling his colleagues in the Utah legislature they could dismiss the results of that study, showing that kratom is well tolerated and safe for consumer use, even at extraordinarily high levels, because that study was funded by the kratom industry. That is untrue. And Senator McKell refused to correct that lie, even when he was told and knew it was untrue. He has two noses, or a long Pinocchio nose too. It is adulterated kratom products that are the real problem. Yet Kolodny and his troubadour troupe casually dismisses concerns about chemically manipulated 7-hydroxymetrogenine opioids by claiming the rising harms predate their recent appearance, claiming these products did not arrive on the market until mid-2025. New evidence, admitted even by the 7-OH manufacturers themselves, is that they were marketing their chemically manipulated 7-OH opioids years earlier, but they simply deceived consumers by calling it natural kratom. And now it appears they've deceived the scientists who relied upon that mid-2025 entry date in looking at the adverse events that were reported and mislabeled and mischaracterized as natural kratom. But the central question is not whether adverse events existed before the emergence of these high-potency, chemically manipulated 7-OH opioid products. The question is whether policymakers should distinguish between natural kratom leaf products and these chemically manipulated substances that are specifically engineered to produce stronger opioid-like effects. Federal health authorities already have. In 2025, HHS Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and then FDA Commissioner Marty Makary recommended Schedule I controls for chemically manipulated 7-OH opioid products, while simultaneously emphasizing that the FDA was not focused on properly manufactured natural kratom leaf products. Kolodny's commentary attempts to erase that distinction. Kolodny is joined by the latest anti-kratom campaign, and it looks like Dean Francis' social media post that was publicly teasing what appears to be the Kolodny article as open quote, super bad news, unquote, for the kratom community is on the same thin ice for credibility as Wendy Chamberlain of Kratom Danger Awareness and Patty Wheeler, who have similarly promoted narratives blaming natural kratom leaf products for tragedies that remain the subject of substantial scientific and factual dispute. And Dean Francis's own claims that his son was pushed into expensive drug rehab programs because of natural leaf kratom is still completely unproven. And Dean has refused multiple invitations to join me in a public forum to present his evidence. Here is the plain fact. The latest Dean Francis post and Andrew Kolodny's audition to be the new anti-kratom naysayer just got bigfooted by NIH and the real science. After years of predictions that kratom would inevitably be scheduled, banned, or exposed as the next opioid epidemic, the facts keep moving in the opposite direction. This new human clinical trial has been authorized to examine whether kratom-derived compounds can help address opioid addiction itself, is a huge move forward in research. None of this means that kratom is risk-free. No biologically active substance is. But what it does mean is that Kolodny's simplistic comparisons of kratom to OxyContin and the prescription opioid crisis are scientifically unsound, like the man with two noses was. The real lesson of the opioid crisis is not that every substance interacting with opioid receptors should be banned. If that were true, numerous approved medications and naturally occurring compounds would face the same treatment. The actual lesson is that public policy should be guided by evidence rather than ideology or the opinions of people like Andrew Kolodny. But unfortunately, Kolodny's commentary demonstrates that some critics of kratom have still not learned that lesson. On Monday, the commentary will remain what it was when it was submitted, an opinion piece built on selective evidence, outdated talking points, and an utter refusal to acknowledge the rapidly changing scientific landscape surrounding the truth about kratom. The science moved forward. Andrew Kolodny's argument has not. I'll stand by with great interest to see what Dean Francis made up big hyperbolic claim about the kratom's demise on Monday. I think he just got slammed with this latest announcement. Thank you, and stay tuned for future episodes of End Kratom Misinformation. We appreciate your joining us on this journey to find the truth.
So, Mister, you saw that I said 25. I'm going to have to go back and correct that. It's stuck in my head for some reason.
Yeah, you keep getting that confused, buddy.
Yeah, I know. I Andrew Kolodny when I do that.
I had to go Google what troubadour meant.
Well, what did you find out? Because I need to make sure that's right too.
It means a troubadour was a traveling poet and musician during the Middle Ages, typically the 11th to the 13th centuries, who composed and performed original songs. So their songs were basically about chivalry, politics, and war.
They're the troubadours, anti-kratom troubadours. They truly are.
So I wanted to ask you about because I still worry about this with the NIH, study going on, all that stuff. Is like I said, I asked Dr. McCarty this, will it, if they make a pharmaceutical out of metragenine, will we no longer have free access to get, natural kratom?
No, and here's the reason. The way, now what's going to happen is they have a purified version of kratom. That purified, and that's a big change from natural kratom leaf products. They have to essentially extract it into a purified form at some level, whatever, and it's going to be a high purity content. Then that goes through the NDA process. Here's the challenge for the NIH to attract a partner that's willing to invest on the pharma side for this product, because it would be expensive and a long-term project. When they enter the market, an individual is going to have to say, can I get the same effect if I just use natural leaf kratom? That's going to be part of the economic evaluation that any partner that the NIH tries to attract to this. I believe that they will not find one, and there's certainly not the money to go through the NDA process with the NIH budget, because it is a multi-billion-dollar project typically for this, and there's not the big payoff at the end because people can use the natural leaf product. What it might do is clear the path for there to be more concentrated extracts under certain conditions that could be used by people that are suffering from opioid use disorder. But that's in and of itself a very high hill to climb, and probably would take some statutory help from Congress. But if the study shows that it is part of the solution to the opioid crisis, then I think there would be serious consideration of that. And so that might be the alternate pathway that would come up from it. But I can tell you the bottom line is that natural kratom leaf consumers will continue to have access to these products and not to worry about what's happening here on this study. The most important thing from this study was the clearance by the Institutional Review Board. Independent, they have to determine based on all the science presented to justify the study that a human subject will not be put at unreasonable risk of injury. And I think death is included in an injury. And so the troubadours have to explain that. Maybe that's going to be the announcement on Monday by Dean Francis. I don't know. It would be fascinating to see. Now, certainly after he sees this video, he's going to have to say, "Oh, what am I going to announce?" And that might, I don't know. We'll have to see. But
maybe the announcement will be the DEA scheduling a 7-OH.
Which he said, which he says he wants all of it banned. He says that 7-OH is just a diversion by the kratom community to criticize that it's kratom that's the problem. And so he'll have to reconcile those statements. That's the problem. I'm going to have to live with the fact that I made the mistake that 7-OH came on in 2025. Eating that mistake, and I'm going to have to put up on the video, Mac made a mistake here. It's 2023, and I'm going to
just go edit it.
I will do that, but I'm going to. I made a slip of the tongue, and so maybe that's the major announcement that the Dean Francis will have. Mac Haddo made a mistake, and okay, here it is. That discussion. Let's go talk to Governor Spanberger about that and see where your mistake was. Oh, maybe it's because you misled her about what the story that your son is telling as being accurate. I don't know yet, but there's something wrong with the fact that they're not willing to step up and tell this story. And
I mean,
I
if it were
remember-
me, I would shout it from the roofs. I mean, if I truly believed in something, I mean, I advocate every day for what my truth is, so I just don't see the problem.
But Jen, that's the trap. He has already laid down the marker. His truth is it was natural kratom leaf that drove him into this addiction rehab center and had to go through months-long, very expensive treatment. Okay, now prove it.
Yeah.
He went through the 5-day detox that costed $30,000. So he's in I think he's in outpatient rehab right now or something like that.
Yeah.
Cameron, if you're watching this, I would love to interview you. I am a recovered opioid addict, and that's why it irks me about how Dean wanted that warning label on the packaging in Virginia. If kratom was anything like an opioid, there's no way that I would only take it once a day. There's no way that I take 1 to 4 days off every week. I was in my active addiction. I was craving the pain pills every 2 hours.
Maybe Misty, maybe this is what I say, that the kratom kicked in just when I started talking about 7-OH and the market entry date, and was the kratom that made me say 2025.
Oh, damn. Damn that 45 minutes.
that adverse event that addled me.
That's the other thing. People don't believe that you take kratom, and I'm like, yes, he does. He takes it.
I'm not advertising. This is where is it? I take it every day.
Yep. And it's
And
then
I can tell you that if I didn't take it, I would be more impaired physically than I am right now. I'm 75 years old, and I got to tell you, I took a fall down in the Georgia legislature, and I'm on the tail end in my hip of recovering from that. But they wanted to prescribe all these medications. No, I got kratom, and it's helping me great. And kratom doesn't give me euphoria. I don't think it does. I know what euphoria is. I went through a procedure for a colonoscopy here, and the anesthesiologist gave me some anesthesia, I know what euphoria is.
My husband went through that.
Yeah.
He had a good old time.
I remember Jen showing me the video. So did you have all the farts afterwards?
What? This is a very personal thing you're asking. Look, everyone has to have that going through. I mean, it's all the air in your gut, and you're going to have to pass the air out. There's no question.
You ain't got an Andrew done.
This is a very personal thing.
Andrew colonoscopy.
Yeah. You know, and poor Andrew, you got to think about it from his perspective. He just gets off this, protracted time when he was viewed to be this great expert, and he was invited and paid to go and testify, which he had to confess then to these journals. And then he gets all this money from consulting with local governments to tell them how they can cash in on the settlement funds. And now it's dried up, and he's just looking for another gig. And he loms on to Kratom because, I don't know, Scott Gottlieb says it was an opioid. And if Scott Gottlieb said it, my God, it must be true. And so he's in there, and he's now in this fight. And the thing that stuns me is that when he sat there a couple of weeks ago at the congressional, was it 2 weeks ago, at the congressional briefing, and he looks me in the eye and he repeats what Gottlieb said. And I'd already told him back in February that was a bunch of nonsense. And now either he doesn't care, because it doesn't fit his narrative, or he just is so locked and loaded and not really a scientist, but rather this consumed, money-hungry guy that's looking for the gig. I don't know. I run into people.
I mean, if he can sit through that whole scientific symposium or sit through all that stuff and not retain anything, that's a little scary.
Yeah.
He's lacking some Kratom.
Yeah. But I was stunned when I talked to him to filter out of, Dr. Nora Volko's presentation and walk out and says, well, Nora says that it is an opioid withdrawal. And I literally thought he was joking, just taunting me.
Yeah.
And then I probed him, and he actually believed it.
Mm-hmm.
So how can anyone think that a filtered kind of recollection of someone who just walked out within minutes of that presentation to regurgitate that, and now here he is months later promoting the along with his troubadour friends, because they all love each other now. You go on social media and they're all liking each other's posts, and Andrew's in there with them, and Andrew's got this new group, it's an older group that he's transitioned now to focus on Kratom. He's got all of his little minions lined up, and he's got this infrastructure ready to turn on Kratom because he did in the opioid. And to his credit, it was effective. He got he was the architect of some of the restrictions that were placed by the government because the government made a mistake. They believed him.
Yeah.
What he was saying was true, and they didn't measure the impact on pain patients and exactly what they were confronting. And they instead decided they were going to go after the, this whole Purdue Pharma situation, which in and of itself was god awful. And here's an interesting tidbit and fact for Andrew to consider. If you look at the records, Scott Gottlieb was one of the architects himself of getting opioids into this huge funnel that went through West Virginia, where you had people you had millions more doses of opioids under the Gottlieb construct of delivery of opioids than people existed in that county. I mean,
whoa.
It was a pill machine, and it was Gottlieb that did it. And now you look back, at least he was the supervised it and implemented that process. Now that's a little fun tidbit for Andrew, when I'm sure he'll have Scott Gottlieb on some sort of a program like this, and he can ask Scott, well, what about that problem with the pill mills that you were facilitating? Maybe you could explain that to the American people. I'm sure Andrew will do that because he wants to find the truth. As he goes forward.
Making a living off people's suffering is very much what he lives his life.
Someone once told me that when you say something tongue in cheek, that you have to go like this.
Oh my gosh. So the other thing, Mac, the comments you got on that episode 3 of misinformation about 7OH, and then your ex post, the comments that you received, it's just like they're all repeating. All the 7OHers are repeating the same stuff. They're saying, well, if the AKA would have advocated for 7OH, then we wouldn't have these bans popping
Thanks
off.
to Matt Cadow.
Yeah.
It's like, if you thought for real, you really thought that was going to sit and just be for sale forever, over the counter, an opioid, you are living in another world.
Yeah, I understand the messaging, which is derivative of largely the pitch that's being developed by the 7OH community. I get it that there are people that are hooked on it now, that they're addicts. I get it. And no one wants to give it up, right?
Mhm.
Because when you're taking an opioid, and this is, make no mistake, it is a chemically manipulated 7OH opioid and all the follow-on products, you don't want to give it up. But the risks that are associated with the consumption of an opioid are real. And anybody wants to know why, and I say it all the time, the burden falls on the manufacturer of a product to enter the market to follow federal law. And the federal law is clear that you have to have a reasonable basis of safety under conditions of use, meaning labeling, prior to market entry. And then you hear, Vince Sanders publicly admit in an interview in 2024, by the way, that he saw this market entry that was unbelievable, that it outpaced all of his cannabinoid products that he'd been selling for the past 10 years, and 7OH was the product, and we're buying it off the shelves. Why? Because it's an opioid. That's why. And for Vince Sanders or any other 7OH manufacturer to go on the market today, they have to follow federal law. And when asked by the reporter, well, isn't it true that you didn't have any evidence? He goes, well, yeah, that's true. He said, but we're testing, we're using science for people that are using it. And he's relying upon the false narrative that there's no adverse events related to 7OH.
And I hear all the time, and I mean, I guess it's at least a little bit more honest of a thing to say, well, it's better than, heroin or fentanyl. I mean, and I guess like in a way they're, that's what they're substituting it as, but it's like, what about everybody else? What about all the people that are getting duped into it, getting told it was a Kratom product? Like, it's just not safe. It's not a good thing to have on the market.
No.
It needs to be taken off the shelves.
I
Seven-O's got to go.
Yeah, I don't advocate for pain patients to go down the corner and buy cocaine or heroin.
Right.
I will not advocate for 7OH. I will not follow this live and let live nonsense, because live and let die. Because if you let them live that experience of going down to 7OH, the risks that are associated with the consumption of a 7OH opioid product are the same as or nearly as bad as heroin, cocaine, and morphine and other overdose-prone opioids that created the opioid crisis in the first place. And so that's where our focus should be. I wish Andrew Kolodny would focus on it. I wish that Dean Francis would focus on it. I don't know whether Dean Francis's son consumed 7OH. I don't know whether, if he did, whether Dean Francis knew about it. If there's evidence out there that shows that he did, he would become the biggest hypocrite in the country. He would have to go and apologize on his knees to Governor Spanberger for misleading her, if that's the case. But we don't know, and we have a right to know, but we're not going to get that information because we can't have a civil discourse.
Yeah.
I believe it was in a news article that I read.
Yeah, we'll find out, because we're going to keep pursuing this, and at some point, Dean Francis and Cameron Francis are going to have to justify what they're saying. They're going to have to prove it, and maybe we'll hold the forum in Missouri. Maybe that's where we do it. Show me, just give me the facts.
Dude, I like this question here, but Tracy, she has a good point, because they didn't follow federal law. why can't the government just pull it off the shelves? Why do they need to schedule it and waste time? Like here in Tennessee, they weren't enforcing it, so it's been sitting on the shelves this whole time. I think, it's probably going to happen everywhere until they schedule it.
Yeah, so Tracy offers a very good question. One of the problems that we face in this country is resources in order to enforce laws. And we see this all of the time. And we saw that in the KCPA states, the biggest criticism is that the government's not enforcing what the law says. Now, in the dietary supplement space, there's not a lot of enforcement that goes on until you get an adverse event or you have a report of a violative product being sold. It's not typically something that you have a Gestapo group of federal agents or state agents that run around looking at the products that are being sold. They look for they're surveillance tools, and they look for reports of either adverse events and clusters of adverse events, or they look for consumer-based complaints about a violative product. That's a weakness that is going to be across the board. Should the FDA step on these products that violated the federal law? And the answer is yes. The problem is the FDA has to go through the Department of Justice because the FDA has no specific legal enforcement authority on criminal statutes. So it's not worth it to them. Let's be frank. They don't have the team to do it. The Department of Justice is consumed with other things than going out and chasing around a Kratom manufacturer or a 7-OH manufacturer. So in this case, it requires a bright bar to be set for a product that we know is unsafe. Thank goodness that you have the Florida Attorney General that took the step because he had unique authority to say 7-OH products are out, and he enforced it. I mean, he went out and threw them off the shelf. So much so that the major 7-OH manufacturer in the state of Florida has been bragging at the Champ Show that he's got millions of packages of 7-OH that are ready to swoop into the marketplace in Florida as soon as that rule ends on June 30th. So we'll see how that works out for them. Because
can he do a second ruling?
Yes, he can, and I fully expect he will, because and this is an interesting story about politics. According to a member of the Florida legislature who wrote listen to this, Andrew, a commentary that was published where he said that the problem was with the Speaker of the House, who hated the Attorney General, who wanted to run for Attorney General, who was getting substantial, these are a lot of dots to follow, who was getting substantial contributions from the 7-OH industry, and who was having an affair with the lobbyist who was for 7-OH. And that over a couple of year period, this lobbyist was making bank, according to this member of the legislature, getting a lot of money because of that interesting, influential position that she had with the speaker. And I'm not sure how to define an influential position in that situation, but obviously, if they're having an affair, then there's the issue. The last issue was the speaker apparently wanted to run for Attorney General, so much so he would oppose the current Attorney General, so much so that he had purchased the URL Perez for AG, which gives you an indication he probably wanted to run for Attorney General. My understanding is he no longer will be a candidate for Attorney General because this has now been exposed. This sex scandal, the problem. But he was the one that stood in the way of getting the rule finalized that would have protected consumers in the state of Florida because of the flood of money he was getting from the 7-OH industry. So will the Attorney General of the state of Florida have the courage to refile his rule, which would then, if he does it, take effect through the end of the legislature next year? So a year-long ban on 7-OH, another year, and that would allow the legislature, absent the Speaker of the House, who is term limited, absent his influence, and absent the position of the 7-OH lobbyist with him in his office, will we be able to get a will we be able to get a legislative rule on this? Yes, I think that's going to happen. And then you look at the AG in Missouri, who, to her credit, went after 7-OH products based on their misleading, the deceptive marketing of them. That was the law that she had available to her. Now, I'm not happy about the fact that some people on her staff, not her, some people on her staff are bought into this narrative. Well, let's ban it all, and we have some education work to do there, and some legislative work, obviously, to do it, because the 7-OH people have been heavily investing in the lobbying effort there in Missouri that we're going to have to fight. And Jeff Smith, the executive director of the Hart Group, is a former state senator there, so obviously has some influence. So I think that the challenges are out there, but we're seeing progress in some of these areas where there's a willingness for enforcement, but it is clearly not sufficient at this point, and that's why a Schedule I classification makes it a criminal offense. And then you get law enforcement heavily involved. And just as you saw what happened in Arkansas, where the pro basketball player drove his car into Arkansas to show a friend his new car, and he got stopped, and he had Kratom products, and he said, and I have 7-OH too. Now, what it looks like is that the police officer didn't know what 7-OH was. They knew what Kratom was, because Kratom's scheduled in the state of Arkansas. So they let him off the hook on 7-OH. He had 220 or 30 grams of 7-OH, of Kratom raw material. I got a copy of each of the products and listing to the company. I'm not familiar with the company. I have serious questions about the products, whether or not they follow GMP standards. I have no idea what's in them. So there's a lot of information that we don't know about that circumstance, and we haven't seen. He subsequently, a couple of weeks later, died out in California, and the tox screen has not yet been produced, and I don't know that it will, but when it does, and if it does, then we'll learn a lot more about this. Whether it's
I know KDA's holding their breath.
Oh, them
hoping that
headlines are just alluding to it. It's like they're really reaching. They're really reaching.
So if he died, let's say he died from a Kratom product represented as a natural Kratom leaf product, then we need to know what that natural Kratom leaf product was, what it's constituted, was it adulterated with other chemicals like it did over in Sweden? That's what we need to know. And I don't care what Wendy Chamberlain, the chief troubadour, who says, don't show your autopsy. How could she be waiting for an autopsy from a public figure like this and justify without disclosing, I don't know, what her son's results were? I'd love to see this. And so I think that when we have maybe this is it. Maybe it's not just Dean Francis or Cameron Francis. Maybe we get the whole group together and they can pick the monitor. Let's have, this is the ideal thing. Mike McKell gets to be the moderator, right? And we have the troubadour troop over here, and we get to see Patty Wheeler. We get to see Cameron and Dean Francis. We have them, and we could have Wendy Chamberlain, right? We have them all. And
like Family Feud. And Mike McKell could be the host.
He could be the host.
Yeah.
No problem with that. As long as they give me a chance to give a counter opinion, that's all we want. And more importantly, it's not my opinion that matters. The truth from them. Let's have them, and I'll ask the questions. I don't know, Patty. Did the autopsy report say that Kratom was tested positive but was non-quantifiable? Which it did, by the way. And if it did, how in the world can you get to a conclusion that metrogeny caused the death of your son? Because
how in the world can you make a whole documentary about that?
Because you're connected to Hollywood.
Yeah.
And then, Dean, how much did you know about what was going on with your son? I have a son that lied to me all the time. I had a filter for it. I knew when his lips were moving that I should doubt what he was saying, right? I've been through that experience. So, Dean, what do you know about what your son was really taking? But more importantly, Cameron, tell us. Have you taken 7-OH? Were you taking 7-OH at the time that you went through some of these difficult times? When you went into rehab, was it natural Kratom leaf or was it 7-OH, which is a chemically manipulated 7-OH opioid? Tell us. And by the way, tell your dad while we're here, because your dad has exposed your story, if it's not complete, that's the critical point, to a lot of people that you have to be accountable for. And Wendy, let's see your son's autopsy. Let's look at it. Let's examine it. And let's not have this don't show our autopsies because people will manipulate the results. Let's just see it.
I
And
mean,
let's,
look how far Tennessee got until we
Mhm.
saw the top. I mean, it got so far that it's
it was too late.
yeah.
And now a member of KDA is trying to justify that the 3,000 nanograms of Benadryl or diphenhydramine in his system was the cause of redistribution.
So this is a fascinating area of science, and I'm studying it closely and trying to understand it better. But Dr. Marilyn Eustace described this process, and she's an experienced forensic toxicologist. And she said that there are going to be issues about redistribution. So the timing of the autopsy is critically important. The location of where the blood is drawn is critically important. And she said the important factor here is that redistribution affects everything. I mean, there's some substances that are more susceptible to it. We know we can eliminate those, and we know what substances are depending on where they're found in the body, where the blood is drawn. So those are factors that can be considered. And they should be considered because no one wants an inaccurate result that leads to a public policy that is either good or bad, depending on the circumstance. So now all of a sudden, these experts in redistribution who never wanted the autopsies to be publicly present in the first place suddenly become, oh, well, let's talk about redistribution. Hey, great. Let's have that discussion. Let's talk about whether or not a person who took Benadryl at the levels at which they were taking it, and who reportedly, by some accounts, was actually taking it for the purpose of ending their lives. If that's happening, let's discuss it. And let's not take this emotional, springboard to say, well, because my son was taking kratom, let's ban it. You know, the fact that a high level of Benadryl was present in the system is a legitimate basis for a question to be raised about whether it's there. And certainly that question should be evident to every legislator. And, Matthew Davenport's law is about everything that's true on that tox report. We need to know what that is. CJ's law in New Jersey, the same thing. Dan Gibbs' argument with his son in Ohio, saying, my son died of just kratom. That's what it says on the tox report and autopsy. And yet he is unwilling to talk about the MMWR from CDC, which shows a big weakness in that because of things that weren't tested. And he mocks me and says, oh, well, how can you just justify your position based on what's not shown on the tox screen? I mean, I'm thinking, what? The whole idea is that a tox screen ought to look at all the factors associated with the death if a family member is going to step up and say, this is what caused the death of my family member. Let's find out the truth. That's all. And if it, at the end of the day, it can be proved that kratom was the single cause of the death, then that needs to be evaluated in the context of the overall science. FDA needs to take a position. NIDA needs to take a position. And by the way, the Institutional Review Board, the independent group, can then consider that as they go forward with these studies. So listen, every family who loses a family member is entitled to grief and to our collective understanding about where they are. But when they convert into being public advocates, they take on a responsibility. And that responsibility means you have to tell everything. You can't just play the game as believe me, because I have a tox screen or an autopsy report that I have interpreted to do this, when it takes a more exhaustive review. And we should move forward based on good science, accurate data, and conclusions that are defensible, because right now that's their problem.
Let's find out the truth so it can be prevented. Not
Right.
find out, not ban kratom because of what you see on the death certificate or the autopsy findings. You know what I mean? Let's find it so like for Matthew Davenport's death, he had four intoxications in his system. It was not ruled a mitragynine toxicity only, or kratom death only. It was 4.
How can you say that? Because I heard the sponsor of that bill stand up and declare that it was only kratom that killed this kid.
Yeah.
Said it. And it's just astounding that people, I guess she's in the club with Mike McKell,
Hmm.
where they can say things, not be accountable. Shame on her, because I don't care what cause you want to take as a legislator, you have to be accountable to your colleagues for the truth. And the fact that you got all spun up, you thought you were right, you need to then correct the record when you find out you're wrong. And
Right.
I don't think that's in her based on my conversations.
Just like Jay Morrison and Debbie Villini, how do you say her last name? Louisiana. They're all in with.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And that's part of the overall discussion that's going on, where Senator Mike McKell, the paragon of truth, says that he talked to Representative Leo and their ban on kratom justifies what's going on. This is the woman who, by the way, won't talk to me. This is the woman who stood on the floor of the Louisiana legislature and answered the question from a colleague about whether or not the problem she was describing was because of the synthesized products. And she pompously, and we got the video, that says, you tell the lobbyists that told you that there is no such thing as a synthetic kratom product. No such thing. 2 months later, the HHS secretary and the then FDA commissioner stand before the country and say, here's the scientific evidence that synthetic kratom products are killing people in their opioids.
I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall for real when she saw that press release, like that press conference.
What I didn't see, and I'm sure she's done it, that she went onto the floor and said to her colleagues, you know what, I made a mistake.
Right.
I think there was a synthetic, and we should rescind that law because I was operating on inaccurate information. I'm sure she did that because any responsible, any ethical, and any honest legislator would do that. They'd say, I made a mistake. And I'm sure that Mike McKell somewhere has stood in the Capitol, maybe in a dark corner in the dead of night when no one was there to say, I made a mistake. Maybe that happened. I just haven't seen it.
Debbie born last night video.
Yeah. maybe they talk to themselves in front of the mirror before they go do their legislation stuff. They're like, I made a mistake. Then they go out and just forget that they even said that.
Well, they self-justify the mistake by saying, I was right. This is important and who cares, And I had a meeting with a senior legislative leader in Utah this week, and I described all of the errors made by Mike McKell and in detail. And the one that's the worst is that he stood in a caucus meeting with his colleagues, and in Utah, the Republicans hold the veto-proof majorities. And I found this out from one of his colleagues at a meeting here recently. He stood before the caucus and said, you need to pass this bill because it is a compromise with the industry. And I told the legislative leader, I said, that is not true. Not only did the industry not compromise on it, he would not even talk to anyone in the industry or in the consumer advocacy group. He refused. His comment was, there's nothing you can tell me that's going to change my mind. Didn't care about the truth, but he lied to his colleagues and said, this is how it got passed. This is a compromise that we've reached with the industry.
Oh my God. I didn't even know that.
Neither did I until I talked to a colleague and I asked him, why is it that you voted against us in that last vote? Because he had voted every time with each amendment against McKell on Gray. And he said, well, Mac, he says, because he told the caucus at the end of the day, right before passage, that a compromise had been reached. I was stunned. So I went to another member of the Utah legislature, senator, who was there at the same meeting. And I talked to her and said, what do you recall about this? And she said, oh, McKell said that you guys reached a compromise. So is it any surprise that we have a bill that was unfair to consumers, that punitively punished the second largest manufacturer of kratom products in the country based in Utah, now has to leave Utah? Can anyone think that that's justified?
And all the extracts are taken out of the shops. You have to buy kratom in a specialty tobacco shop, which, like I said, I cannot picture a grandma going in there to go buy her kratom. Like, that's not their environment, you know?
Okay, you guys have talked me into it. Mikkel can no longer be the moderator. He has to be on the panel with the rest of them. That's just the way it is.
I'm sure we can find a host for the Family Feud.
Yeah, I'll be the moderator. I signed myself up.
There you go. There you go. Well, all the joking aside, someone has to get to a point where there's accountability.
Yeah.
Mhm.
What they're saying. And you don't see them on their side saying, oh, let's have a meeting and let's make the AKA accountable. You don't see them calling for that. They're saying we're not going to talk to them.
They type it out.
Yeah, you're right. They're the keyboard commandos, and they don't care about the truth. They don't. And if they did, they would be pursuing it. And they're not only not pursuing the truth, they're running from it. So we have to be vigilant in our efforts. And I appreciate all of the advocates who will step up, who will talk about these things. We have an important hearing coming up on Wednesday in Georgia. We also have a hearing in California, although I believe and I hope that the bill is going to get pulled in California because it is a mess right now and not the right bill. But in Georgia, people show up. Now, I am positive, I am certain that in Georgia, we are going to see Robin Graham there.
You're making your cheeks all big over there, buddy.
Because she said people have to get off their butts and get to these hearings. I'm sure she's going to be there. I mean, how could anyone doubt it? This is what we confront, and that's part of the troubadours. We should put the kratom gals on that side too. This is going to be a very interesting panel because you got this whole group of people over there who are promoting, what are essentially falsehoods about the kratom plant, about the consumers who use it responsibly. Too bad. A sad set of circumstances.
That's the other thing. You know what? If I lose respect for somebody, that's honestly way worse than me hating somebody. Because it's like when you are a kratom advocate, you talk about natural kratom. You keep natural kratom safe and legal. You don't use your platform to offer up other people telling their 708 stories. You're inadvertently advocating for 708 when you do that.
Oh yeah. I mean, part of advocating is having people tell their story. Like we tell our stories. So you have 708 involved, and people are saying that they have good experiences with them, even though 99.9% of the population does not.
They don't.
I mean,
Sure.
California. Connie asked what's going on in California.
Okay, this is it's always complicated, but here's the bottom. The chairman of the Senate Health Committee has told the sponsor of AB 1088 that she wants to amend her bill to ban all kratom. That's her bottom line. And that she is persuaded that there's so much contention between the 708 groups and the kratom community that she wants to ban all of it. So we obviously are not supporting that as much as the 708 community might be. And so we're hopeful that we can get the vehicle for that amendment to be removed, and we'll live to fight another day. Very unfortunate circumstance. I think that the solution in California, at least the short-term solution, is going to be the change in the FDA and Kratom webpage, which we're working hard on, and we're making it a priority. And that'll be a part of the main discussion, as I referenced earlier, in the Ohio lawsuit against the Department of Agriculture, where the central point is that the Kratom FDA and Kratom webpage is wrong. Now, that won't have precedential value other than it will show that if we're successful, that a judge, after reviewing all the evidence and data, concluded that the reliance by the Department of Agriculture in the state of Ohio should not be on a FDA and Kratom webpage, which is only guidance, not a statutorily passed rule. And that's the key part of where California is hanging their hat in the Department of Agriculture. So we got a challenge, and we're going to, litigation's always the hardest part, but we're going to pursue it now because this has now gotten to the point where there's no option for us other than to do that.
I like that you just threw your gloves off. You know what? You're like, I'm going after the, kratom danger awareness and their crap, and then you just threw your gloves off. I freaking love this side of Mac.
Well, as everyone knows, I'm pretty much a wuss, and and they have to push me to the wall to get to this point. But we are now going to say, let's all be accountable, right? Andrew Kolodny, let's be accountable. That's something he's not familiar with. Certainly, Dean Francis has not held his son accountable, or at least does not appear he has. So let's have him step up and be accountable, and
man up.
And I think the Kratom Danger Awareness people have to do the same, along with Patty Wheeler, that troubadour group of anti-kratom charlatans that are running around the country with their nonsense, and certainly that class of Mike McKells and Deborah Vallejo, they have to step up and admit that they made a mistake.
I cannot call myself a Kratom advocate if I'm given quarter to 7OH. I hope the Kratom Gals platform changes their view because they have done a lot for the Kratom education. You know what?
I'll tell you this. I give them their due. I think that Madeline Sklar obviously is an advocate for Kratom leaf products. We can talk all day long about her motivations, how things have changed to the Kratom Gals. I get that. But bottom line, I think that's true. But she takes this view because she has on her podcast people that are apologists for 7OH and misses the entire point. The idea that someone might be using a substance that helps them and therefore you don't get involved in it. You do not tell these people to go down to the corner and buy cocaine and heroin. You don't do it. Right. But that's what they're essentially saying. And the predicate here is 7OH legitimately on the marketplace? Is it what they claim it is, which is just a kratom product? It is a chemically manipulated, engineered 7OH opioid. That's what they're peddling. And the problem for Madeline is that she wants to split the baby here and say, I personally do not advocate for people taking 7OH. Despite the fact that she's on the 7OH advocacy website that she visited, which she defends and say, well, I just was on there to learn. She can't be totally pure, but she's over here. And then she has Robin Graham, who I have no idea where that woman is, but or that person is, I guess I should say, because I'm a feminist.
Yeah.
But I cannot figure out where that woman is. But she says, oh, we advocate for natural kratom, but we're not going to oppose 7OH. Well, I don't know. That gives them the ticket for all of these hearings, for all of these ban proposals, because
they don't show up at.
Which they don't show up at. And well, now I'm positive that Robin's going to be in Georgia. I already told you that. And certainly she'll be in the next meeting in Montana because she's been AWOL from those. And then you have the real group over here. You have Amanda who works for a 7OH company who says, oh, we're against that stuff that's attractive to kids. Go look at the Wonderland website, which she works for, and you tell me at the end of the day you've looked at those products that there's any way that you could say those aren't products that are attractive to children.
Or you could go watch Mac's video titled "Response to the Kratom Gals," and he's got it all broken up in there.
And I'm telling you that the people that are using 7OH that are on the Kratom Gals website, God love them, they're taking advantage of a product that bypassed federal law, which is now the predicate for most of the ban proposals across the country, both at the state and local level. And if you're getting some relief from 7OH, however you got there, whether you were duped or whether you intentionally did it, and you heap this kind of burden on the kratom community because of your selfish interest, that's why I'm done. And I was on a call with a bunch of industry people the other day, and I told them, I said, shame on you if any of you are supporting in any way the Kratom Gals podcast because they have lost their way. They are part of the problem here, and they can't excuse it by saying, "Oh, we don't, we just don't think you should criminalize anyone, and you shouldn't ban 7-OH." That's being part of the problem.
Yeah, and we're not demonizing people that use it, but
No.
I mean, you are contributing to the problem, openly talking about it and advocating for
You're
it.
contributing to the downfall of Kratom. And like I said, Jen and I, they want to talk about, let's not keep scoreboard. You only don't want to keep scoreboard because you don't show up to none of these hearings. Jen and I dedicated thousands of hours since July last year, since July 2025, to attend these local hearings that are going on. If any of those chicks attended these hearings, they would realize that it's 7-OH.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
So you got, excuse me, you
Like
damn right.
Anybody that thinks that it's not causing any issues is not paying attention.
Yeah.
Is not showing up at these hearings, because hearing after hearing after hearing after hearing, I can't say how many times a day I say I hate 7-OH.
Yeah.
I hate it.
Because it's like we're sitting over here trying to save what's saving us. Nobody from the 7-OH community at all is in these hearings. So yeah, you damn right we're going to keep a scoreboard because it's a flex that we dedicated these thousands. I get irritated about this because I'm sitting right here 6-8 hours a day in all these different hearings, and I don't get paid. I don't get paid to do none of this.
I can't stand it when people say we get paid.
Yeah, I can't either.
Well, and I think that the good intentions argument for the Kratom Gals goes away when Madeline deliberately edits a segment to try to justify what Robin Graham said about advocates.
I saw that.
Interpreted what she meant and what she said. And the segment she edited very creatively was after she made the statement that it's all about apathy and we need, people are not showing up these hearings. She eliminated that and she made it sound like, oh, thank goodness for all the advocates that show up, as though Robin Graham was praising the advocacy community. Her lead-in argument was that the apathy has destroyed the Kratom community, right? And of course the AKA can't get them out. No one can get them out. She was making a pitch, and then they said something that was fascinating to me. They said, "Oh well," and Robin said it. We're not asking for money. Go to their webpage. There's a donation tab. I mean, it's like they're divorced from reality. And then here's another interesting thing, and maybe it's like my saying 2025 when I talk about the introduction. Maybe it's just that. But when a question was asked of Robin Graham by I've forgotten his name, the fellow that his wife is now one of the Kratom Gals, Scott. Is it Pillay? Who's Kratom Gals edition from up in New Hampshire?
Sarah.
Yeah, okay. Her husband asked the question. It was legitimate and said, "Do I remember correctly that there were over 140,000 people at the rally in Washington in 2016?" Right, that's what he said. He asked the question, and Robin Graham, who was not there, by the way, said yes.
What?
Yeah, absolutely. Go back and find. I'll do it.
I ain't looking on my.
Maybe it was 200,000. She said. But anyway, she affirmed that there were over 100,000 people that were at the rally. Now, I don't want to diminish the fact that the several hundred people that showed up for that rally, that was important, no question about it. But in order to inflate her role in getting that started, which no one should diminish, she then inflates it to say that there were a couple 100,000 people that showed up at that hearing.
Dang.
No. And I think it discredits all of us. And she uses that answer to justify how, she was immersed in getting people there. That's why she couldn't attend, because she was organizing rides and getting people there. And at the end of the day, there were a couple of hundred fierce advocates who made a difference. And she wants to call it 200,000 when she's asked. Now, how can anyone misremember that?
Significant.
Yeah, it really is.
Yeah. Well, if you think about it, I mean, a couple hundred, I mean, not only is that a lot, but I mean, our message is, you know,
Oh,
very powerful.
it landed. And I was making the statement at our congressional briefing that Andrew Turner and I were talking about it. And I said, we're inside the building this time instead of outside with the couple.
You did, yeah.
Yeah, and it's true. I mean, we're now talking at a level that is accepted by Congress. They're interested. They're offices that really want to know the truth, and this has been a fascinating journey to understand it better. And we had a report from some of those offices about how it turned them around completely on Kratom because they had been hearing all the misinformation, and these staffers said that they were glad to have heard it and understand it better. And that's the purpose of what we're doing. And I think it wasn't just a briefing, by the way. I think it was the day before when all of the advocates were going office to office and telling their personal stories, their testimonials. They make a difference. And thank you to all of those people that got off their butts and showed up in Washington, D.C.
We walked miles.
Yeah.
We did. Even in those buildings, Mac, it's like a freaking maze.
Unbelievable.
It shocks me. It shocks me. I know Tracy Hudson's here, so I know that she was there. So thank you, Tracy, for going as well.
Yeah, and I know in the 50 years that I've walked the hallways, there's always a new hallway I find, but they're all marble and they're hard on my knees and my hip. And
Oh, I can't imagine.
that's why I need Kratom.
Yeah.
I think I said that to Misty because, like, just her videos and her pictures, I was like, I cannot imagine like as much walking and stuff as Mac would have to do. But I guess that's all because of Kratom.
Part of
Yeah.
the deal.
And we walked our butts off that day. My butt is flatter now.
Tracy's
But
not
I'm glad to hear
on
that.
my feet.
Oh yeah. Well, luckily this year I didn't wear it. So last year I wore these other pink shoes that really gave me blisters on my heels because the lip is inverted on the heel part, and I was like, man, why did I buy these? So last year I had blisters on my heels, but this year I wore my regular Skechers, and I'm like, yeah, my Skechers be doing me right.
I think the one thing that I took away just from the conversations with the advocates is that it really is energizing to me to hear people that are so excited and just thrilled to be a part of this process, and that really is magnificent. And I cannot understate the renewed relationship with Andrew Turner. People should go watch his presentation.
He did an amazing speech.
Yeah.
He really did.
And he was not a fan of Mac Haddo for a while, for a variety of reasons. And so maybe there's hope for all those people, those anti-Mac people out there, that they can come to a reconciliation, because I'm not that bad guy that some people, well, maybe I am, but some people think I'm a terrible person. I do it because it's well beyond the time period that I sort of allocated for this. When I first did it 10 years ago, it was for 3 months that I committed to do it. I only did it because Orrin Hatch called me and asked me to help. And so I jumped into it and helped, didn't think it was going to be successful because it never been a reversal of a recommendation for scheduling up to that time, nor since. And yet we did it. We did something that was precedent breaking. And here we are. And 10 years later, I look back on this experience, and the thing that is really, really inspiring is to hear people that tell their stories. I sat in one of the offices and listened to that testimonial being made and how important that is, better than my sitting there and telling a staffer, far better, about what the potential is when you have a person whose real life experience is exactly what we needed them to hear. So it made a huge difference. And so I'm grateful.
Honestly, emails help, but it's telling your story in person is better than an email.
Well, they put a face to you, and you're just a normal person just trying to live life, and they're like, oh, wow, there might be something to this.
And I think, to be fair, that Madeline made the point, and during the entire time she was making the point about how important the testimonials of advocates in their home state are, and the whole time, Robin Graham is nodding her head, saying yes affirmatively, how critical that is. It is. There's no question. Now, I hope that it inspires Robin Graham to show up in Montana, which she was allowed to do by Zoom
Yeah.
on a couple of those meetings. And I knew she was going to be there on the latest hearing, the interim committee hearing. I knew that she was going to be there to counter the testimony of the KDA people. And I knew there must have been a computer glitch.
Mac, when there's a next hearing like that, make sure you let us know. You know, I know that you were like ahead of time. You didn't know, or
Yeah.
you were told.
Montana people. And guess what? Robin Graham, by her representation, lives in Montana. Hasn't been to 7 hearings that I've been to. She doesn't show. So I don't understand it. Now maybe there's something I'm missing. And you know, her group, Botanical Advocacy and Education, maybe there's something else afoot here that I just don't understand. But I think what we're in this for is to fight for the continued freedom of Kratom consumers to manage their health and well-being with informed choices. That's what I think, and safe products. I think that's our mission. And every voice raised there is important. I'm going to continue to do it as long as I'm able. And I hope that we can all kind of work together to get there. And we can have these divisions. I'm hoping at the end of the day that there is a recognition by some of those critics over at the Kratom Gals that they come full circle here and realize it's painful. They might have to say to Amanda Rayner, you know what, your message really isn't resonating here, and we need to make a change. Maybe it's that, or maybe it's, you know, the other advocates that are using 7-OH, that they are more honest about what the impact is. Because Jen said it right a minute ago. We're not saying that people that are using 7-OH right now, that's their experience. Our target here is to get the manufacturers of these chemically engineered and manipulated 7-OH opioids to get them off the market. And that allows for any consumer then to find other options, which are available. 7-OH just be an opioid that is dangerous for them, and we want to save them in the end. So that's the bottom line.
And you know, maybe it will come for full circle. Maybe years down the road, we'll get thanked for saving Kratom, so that when 7-OH is pulled from the market, they can go back to Kratom and help with their withdrawals that they're going to go through.
Mhm.
That's exactly
But
right.
I ain't looking for no thank you. You know, I do what I do because I'm passionate about it. You know, I've invested 7 years of Kratom advocacy, practicing what I preach.
Yeah.
You know, so
Miss, even though you reject it, I'm going to say thank you. 'Cause you really-
you're welcome. Okay, dang, we've been here almost 2.5 hours, Mac.
Yeah.
Great job. Because of Kratom.
because of Kratom.
Yeah.
Thank you for inviting me to have this discussion, and I hope we can continue to do this to spread the good word.
Yeah.
Thank
So, yeah, if you're available next Saturday, we'll see you on up here as well.
Yeah, week to week. I mean, we'll be able, if we can next Saturday, we will have gotten some clarity about California. We will have the filing of the lawsuit, hopefully, against the Department of Agriculture in Ohio. We'll have the Georgia hearing under our belts. We'll see where that's headed. There are 4 hearings that Chairman Townsend says he wants to have around the state. And I was not invited to participate in the first one, but he says I will the second one. So we'll see, because he has a anti-Kratom advocate that he wants to testify with me, and he's not available on Wednesday. So he's bringing that person in. So it'll be interesting to see who that is. But it doesn't matter, because we're pursuing the truth, and it's not based on personalities. It's not based on even disagreements. It's about finding the truth. And maybe it's
I wonder if it's
Claudia. Great.
I'm wondering if it's going to be Ethan Pope's dad or something like that.
Yeah, maybe, but that's okay. We can certainly, absolutely say that, you know, we have sympathy for families that lose a loved one, but all we're doing is trying to pursue the truth, and to be where
We're going to dissect the truth.
I doubt it'll be one of the ones that was there last time too. So
Well, guys, I got to run. I deeply appreciate this opportunity.
Thank
Yep.
you. Thank you, Mac. You have a
Bye,
great
everybody.
great rest of y'all's weekend, everybody. Thanks for coming.
All right. See you later.
Okay. Wait, there we go.